part 1 of our notes, we were talking all about the gross anatomy of the spinal cord. And now we're going to focus on those spinal nerves and peripheral nerves that are going to be branching off of that. So when we look at the spine, you're going to have those pairs of spinal nerves that are branching off the front and the back side of the spinal cord. And they're going to be paired, so they're going to be lateral to each other. So they're lateral segments coming off the spinal cord, and then they will branch into what we refer to as a peripheral nerve. Peripheral nerves are going to branch from that spinal nerve, but then they're going to be taking both sensory and motor information packaged in that one little thing that then, of course, separate before they get to the spinal cord itself. So all peripheral nerves are mixed nerves. If we look at a cross-section of the peripheral nerve before it branches off into the spinal nerves, what we're going to see is that you're going to have this organization where you have these circular bundles that are going to be inside of it. This is going to look very similar to when we had the whole muscle cross-section where we had bundles of fascicles. The same thing is going to be true here. When you look at this cross-section and you see these bundles, those bundles are each referred to as fascicles. And then you see within the fascicle all these little dots that are inside. So these tubular sections that are running through the fascicles, those are individual axons of neurons. So all of those are individual axons that are running through and packaged together. Just like with the muscle, we are going to have connective tissue layers that are separating each of these different divisions from each other. So of course our outermost that's going to be around the whole peripheral neuron is going to be the epineurium. Instead of epimysium like we had in the muscle, this is epineurium with neurium as the root word for nerve. Then the fascicles themselves are going to be bound with the perineurium. And then when we look at the individual neurons with their axons, they're going to be surrounded by first a Schwann cell, because this is a peripheral nerve. That Schwann cell is a neuroglial cell that is wrapping around the axon that's going to help to propagate our action potential. But around that Schwann cell, we will then have connective tissue, which is going to be the endoneurium. Now recall we had our spinal cord running down the center of the body, and then as you're running down the center, you're going to have those lateral segments in which spinal nerves are going to be going in and out of the spinal cord. Now if we look at the anterior versus the posterior side, you can see how those segments are going to be lining up. And what you'll find is that you'll kind of have this weird little mapping where the different segments are responsible for different areas on the body, and we refer to those different segments as dermatomes. So our technical definition of dermatome is going to be the specific bilateral region of skin that's monitored by a single pair of spinal nerves. Clinically, these are going to be very important because what you can find is if you have a loss of sensation in a certain part of your body or damage to one little area, you can figure out the origin of which spinal nerve is actually going to be associated with it. This is a rash that you see associated with the shingles virus. So the shingles virus is going to be a virus that is going to cause this painful rash. And what you find is that rash is going to line up specifically with a dermatome. And you can figure out which neuron is actually going to be infected by it and which nerve group, because it's going to follow that pattern where it's going to show that actual dermatome. Now this picture looks a little bit intimidating, so let's just take one side at a time. Remember, our spinal cord is going to have mixed nerves that are going into it. So you have a section that's for sensory information and a separate section that's for motor information. When we're talking about sensory information, that means you are receiving signals from receptors, and those receptors want to get that signal to your brain. So they're going to send it through the nerves to your spinal cord, which will then transport that information upward to your brain for your brain to then process it. The sensory information is either going to be collecting information from internally within our body with interoceptors or externally outside the body from exteroceptors. Both of those are collecting information on what is happening around us so that we can send that information through the spinal cord and brain. So remember, we have all these different spinal nerves that are monitoring different segments of our body that we saw in our dermatomes. You can see that we have all these different branches that are coming from different areas. So we can see this is a ramus, which is going to be a branching that's going into our spinal nerve. It's going to be a posterior ramus that's going to be here collecting information. But we also have to take information from our visceral organs that are coming from the other end. So we have this ramus that's going to be coming in, taking that information in. And then laterally as well, we're taking information internal and external that's going to be coming in. And then notice all of them are going to come together and they're going to go in through the posterior side, that posterior root, to then bring that information to our somatic sensory nuclei or the visceral sensory nuclei. So both these areas of the gray matter are taking that information in from the receptors that sent it down through the peripheral nerve, and then we're going to process that within our gray matter and then send it up the length of the spinal cord to go to our brain to then process that information. Now, once the brain has processed information, it may decide that it needs to have some sort of motor command that's going to happen because of it. So the motor commands are then coming out through the anterior portion of the spinal cord. So our anterior root is going to have visceral and somatic motor nuclei. So we need to control what the motor nuclei are going to be doing, whether they're going to the organs, like the visceral ones, or somatic, which is going to be going to like your skin, your muscles, your joints sort of thing. So the visceral nuclei, you do not have any control over that. That's what your organs are going to be doing. Somatic motor nuclei, this is going to be controlling our skeletal muscles. So the information is going to be taken from the spinal cord and it's going to go out through the anterior end, through our anterior root, and then you can see that it's going to have all these different directions that it's going to go in. So you have things that are going to the skeletal muscles of the back, skeletal muscles in different parts of the body. We'll talk more about these other parts where you're taking it to the different organs and how those are going to be reacting. But you have all these different segments that are taking it to different areas on the body based on the motor commands that we're getting. So in this slide, we're going to look at the nerve plexuses. Nerve plexuses are going to be complex interwoven networks of nerve fibers. They're going to be formed from blended fibers of that anterior rami that we saw on those spinal nerves, and it's going to allow multiple spinal nerves to supply the same structures in there. So we have three major groupings. We have the cervical plexus, the brachial plexus, and the lumbosacral plexus, which of course you can separate into lumbar and then the sacral area. When we're talking about the cervical plexus, that's going to innervate the muscles of the neck and the diaphragm. So even though the diaphragm is all the way down at the bottom of your thoracic cavity and your separation between your abdominal and thoracic cavities, it's also going to be innervated by it. So notice that the major nerves that we have listed over here that are all part of the cervical plexus. You should be able to label each of those. When we talk about the brachial plexus is going to innervate the pectoral girdles and your upper limbs. So you can see a lot of the major nerves that are going to be within your brachial plexus, and you should be able to label those. When we talk about the brachial plexus is going to innervate the pectoral girdles and your upper limbs. So you can see a lot of the major nerves that are going to be within your brachial plexus, and you should be able to label those. The third and fourth categories, we kind of put them together, which is that lumbosacral plexus. It's going to innervate the pelvic girdle and the lower limbs. You are not going to need to know all the major nerves of the lumbar plexus, but I would like you to know the last three that are listed in here with the femoral obturator nerve and lateral femoral cutaneous nerve. So those you should be able to identify. For your sacral plexus, you should be able to label all of those that are going to be listed there. But let's focus a little bit on the neurons, the individual functional unit that's going to be sending information and sending your action potentials. We had different ways of organizing our neurons. If we're going to look at them functionally, we can look at how they're bringing information either to or from the CNS. When we talked about sensory neurons that were coming in to the CNS, bringing information from some sort of outside stimuli, picked up by the receptor, brought to the spinal cord, and then processed by the brain. Functionally, we also have motor neurons. Motor neurons are sending commands from that CNS out to effectors to cause some sort of effect. Functionally, we also have interneurons that are going to be between them. The interneurons are within the CNS itself, and they're the ones that are interpreting, planning, and coordinating signals to and from those peripheral nerves that are going to be actively sending the signals into them. Now, when we look at the interneurons, we can put them into neuronal pools, which are functional groups of interconnected interneurons. We can put them into neuronal pools, which are functional groups of interconnected interneurons. So these neuronal pools that we have, they can limit the input and output that is going to occur because they're going to be pooled together. So that might mean they stimulate or depress the parts of the brain or spinal cord that are bringing information related to the particular area that they're dealing with. What we will find is that those neuronal pools will then create these neural circuits, and neural circuits will have these different patterns here that we're talking about. So when we're talking about the information going through a divergent neural circuit, what we're saying is that the information is going to spread from one neuronal pool, and then it's going to branch into multiple different areas that is coming from. So we had the one neuron or one neuronal pool that's sending the information out, then it's going to bring it out to multiple areas, and then it's going to send it outward. This is very common in sensory pathways. We also have convergence. Convergence is kind of the opposite, where we have a circuit where you have multiple inputs coming in, and they're going to converge to one single neuron, which will then take information inward. This is often things that are under your subconscious control, like your diaphragm and breathing, where you have two different neuronal pools that are synapsing with the same motor neuron. We also have serial processing. Serial processing involves having a single path where you're going to have information going sequentially from one neuron, and then it's going to jump to the next neuronal pool and then to the next one. But we also have parallel processing. Parallel processing means that you're getting the same information coming from several neurons or neuronal pools that are processing that information at the same time. So for instance, like if you step on something, like something really sharp that hurts, you get a signal that is spread through several neuronal pools so that as you're yelling in pain, you're also lifting your foot and shifting your weight so that you're not falling over because of it. So that's a lot of parallel processing that's happening because it's a complex reaction that's going to occur based on that one stimulus. But then we can also have reverberation. Reverberation is going to happen when you have these collateral neurons that are going to be in there. So the information is going to come from one particular area, it's going to extend downward, but then it's going to cause a signal to reverberate or come back. This is going to cause this positive feedback loop. So even though you're having this loop going around, you're also still sending that information outwards. So these are things that like maintaining your consciousness and causing normal breathing and coordinating your muscles are going to have that positive feedback circuit.